I did not make a sound when I heard them. That is the part I still think about, even now, sitting here with the morning light coming through the kitchen window and my coffee going cold beside me. I heard every word they said, and I did not make a sound. I just lay at the bottom of the basement stairs with my cheek against the cold concrete, and my hip screaming and my eyes open in the dark, listening. My son said, "I think that's it." His wife said, "Are you sure?" He said, "She's not moving." Then there was a pause, the kind of pause that stretches out too long to mean anything good, and she said, "Finally, now the estate goes to us." I had raised that boy for 38 years. I had packed his lunches and driven him to baseball practice and sat with him through 2 broken hearts and 1 broken arm, and the night his father died when he cried so hard he couldn't breathe. I had loved him the way only a mother loves, without condition, without keeping score. And he stood at the top of my basement stairs in the house his father built and listened to make sure I was dead. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am 68 years old. I have a bad hip, the left one. From a fall off my back porch 3 years ago. I walk with a cane most days, and on bad days I don't walk much at all. I am not a large woman. I am not a threatening woman. I taught 4th grade for 31 years, and I still keep hard candy in a bowl on the kitchen table out of habit. I am exactly the kind of woman that certain people look at and think, easy, that was their first mistake. My name does not matter for this story. What matters is that my husband, a good and careful man who built things with his hands his entire life, houses, barns, a business that grew slowly and honestly over 40 years, left behind an estate worth just over $9 million. When he died 4 years ago, the property alone, 40 acres of farmland in a county where land had become suddenly, improbably valuable, was worth more than either of us had ever imagined when we bought it young and broke with a shared dream and a small down payment. My husband trusted me completely. He put everything in my name and told me I would know what to do with it. I did know. I had a plan. I had spoken with our family attorney, a woman I had trusted for 15 years, and we had drawn up documents that were specific and careful. My son would receive a fair inheritance. My younger sister, who had lived with me and helped me since my husband passed, would be provided for. A portion would go to a small scholarship fund at the elementary school where I had taught. Everything was decided. Everything was documented. Everything was mine to manage until I was gone. My son did not like the plan. He had never said so directly. He was careful. My son, or I, had thought he was, but I had seen it in small ways. The way he and his wife went quiet when I mentioned my attorney. The questions about the farmland that came more frequently after I had a bad week with my hip. The afternoon, I overheard his wife on the phone, saying they needed to move faster. I had told myself I was imagining things. I had told myself that was my boy, that he would not. I had been wrong. It started 3 weeks before the stairs. He called me on a Tuesday and said he and his wife wanted to come for the weekend. He said they wanted to spend time together, just family. I was glad. I made up the guest room and I bought the kind of coffee he likes, and I planned to make the pot roast his father always requested on special occasions. My sister was going to her friend's house for the weekend already planned, and I told her to go ahead, that it would be nice to have my son to myself for a few days. They arrived Friday afternoon. His wife brought flowers, which she had never done before, and she hugged me longer than usual at the door. My son carried the bags inside and walked through the house the way he had when he was a teenager, opening the refrigerator, glancing at the shelves, his hands in his pockets. I noticed it, but said nothing. That evening we had dinner, and it was pleasant enough. He asked about my health. He asked about my hip. He asked, almost casually, whether I had updated any of my accounts recently. I said no. Nothing had changed. His wife refilled my wine glass without asking. Saturday was fine. Sunday morning I woke early, the way I always do, and I went downstairs to start coffee. The light in the kitchen was not on yet, and the house was quiet. I was still in my robe, and I had not gotten my cane from beside the bed because I sometimes manage the stairs without it if I go slowly and hold the rail. I was at the top of the basement stairs. I had been going down to get a jar of preserves from the shelf down there when I heard them behind me. I don't know if he meant to push me as hard as he did. I have thought about this. I have gone back and forth on it in the months since, lying awake, reconstructing the moment. What I know is that his hands hit my shoulders from behind with force, and I went forward, and I went down, and I did not stop until I hit the concrete floor. My hip took the worst of it. My head hit the edge of the second to last step on the way down, and for a moment there was nothing, just white, just absence. Then the white cleared, and there was pain, and there was darkness, and there was my son's voice at the top of the stairs saying he thought that was it. I did not move. I am not sure in those first seconds I could have. But when his wife said finally, "Now the estate goes to us," something happened in my chest that was not grief and was not fear. It was something older and quieter and much more determined. I stayed still. I kept my breathing shallow. I listened. He said they needed to call it in as an accident. He said she was always losing her footing. Everyone knew about the hip. He said by the time anyone got there, it would just be a terrible fall. An old woman with a bad hip who went down the basement stairs in the dark. His wife asked about the estate documents. He said he had already spoken to someone, a name I didn't recognize about the process, once there was a death certificate. They had planned this. Not in the last 5 minutes, not in a moment of greed that overtook them. They had planned it. The weekend visit, the flowers, the wine, the questions about my accounts. They had come to my home with a plan. They went back upstairs. I lay there for a moment longer, just breathing, taking stock of myself the way you learn to do when you get older and your body is less predictable than it once was. My hip was bad. I knew I had re-injured it and possibly done something worse. My head ached deeply, but my hands worked. My arms worked. My mind was working very clearly. There are things about this house that my son never paid attention to, because my son had never been particularly interested in anything that didn't benefit him directly. One of those things was that 18 months earlier, after a set of my husband's old tools went missing from the basement, my sister had suggested I install a small camera on the basement shelf where I kept the jam and the canned tomatoes and the Christmas decorations. It was her idea, not mine. I had thought she was being overly cautious. We had done it together on an afternoon when I was feeling well enough. A small camera that sat behind a mason jar and was so ordinary looking that you would never notice it unless you already knew. It had been recording since Friday evening when they arrived. I did not try to move right away. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I was not foolish and I was not reckless, despite what the situation might suggest. I was injured, and I was alone, and the people upstairs wanted me dead. Moving too soon, making noise, letting them know I was conscious. None of that would have helped me. So I waited. I listened to their footsteps above me settle into the sounds of the Sunday morning they had planned to have after I was gone, the coffee maker, the television, low voices. Then I moved. It took me a long time to get across that floor to the old workbench on the far wall where my husband's cordless phone had sat for 20 years. I had kept it charged out of habit, out of the particular stubbornness of a woman who has learned not to throw out things that still work. I crawled most of the way because standing was not possible, not then, not with the hip the way it was. When I reached the bench, I pulled myself up against it, and I dialed my sister. She answered on the third ring, her voice still morning rough, and I told her to listen and not to speak. I told her where I was and what had happened and what I needed her to do. I told her to call our attorney first and the police second, and to tell the police I was conscious and coherent, and that I would need an ambulance, but that I needed them to come quietly and without my son knowing, if that was possible. I told her about the camera. She said only, "I'm already in the car." I sat on the basement floor with my back against the workbench, and I waited. The pain in my hip was considerable. The pain in my head had settled into something dull and heavy. I thought about my husband, the way I do when things are very hard, not with grief anymore, mostly, but with something like conversation. I told him what had happened. I told him I was going to be all right. I told him I was sorry that the boy we raised had become whatever he had become, and that I didn't know where we had failed, or if we had failed at all, and that some things do not have a clean explanation no matter how long you look for one. The police came in through the back, which my sister had thought to tell them to do. They came down the basement stairs carefully, 2 of them, and they found me sitting against the workbench looking, according to the younger officer, remarkably calm for the circumstances. I told him I was a retired schoolteacher. He seemed to find this an adequate explanation. They brought my son and his wife out through the kitchen. I did not see this happen. I was already being helped onto a stretcher, but my sister told me about it later, in the hospital room where I spent the next 4 days. She said my son had tried to explain that I must have fallen on my own, that he hadn't heard anything, that they'd been asleep. She said the officer had looked at him for a moment and then said, very quietly, that they had a camera and that my son had gone the particular color of a man who understands that the world he had planned is gone. I had a fractured hip, a mild concussion, bruised ribs on my left side that made every breath feel like an argument. The orthopedic surgeon, a practical woman about 20 years younger than me, who had the manner of someone who has seen most things, told me I would need surgery and then a period of rehabilitation that would be measured in months rather than weeks. I told her I had time. My attorney came to the hospital the second day. She sat in the chair beside my bed with her legal pad and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she walked me through everything clearly and without drama, which is what I had always appreciated about her. The camera footage was already in the possession of the police. The estate documents were secure. My son had no access to any of my accounts, and would not the financial protections I had put in place years ago, on my attorney's advice, meant that not a single dollar could move without my authorization. They had come to my house with a plan that had accounted for my death, but had not accounted for my surviving. She asked me if there was anything I wanted to change in my documents. I said yes. She wrote it down. The surgery happened on a Thursday. My sister sat in the waiting room for 4.5 hours and ate vending machine crackers and called me the minute I was out of recovery. She is 7 years younger than I am and looks it, and she is the kind of person who apologizes to furniture when she bumps into it, and I have loved her with my whole heart for her entire life. She slept in the recliner in my hospital room for 3 of the 4 nights I was there, and when I told her she didn't have to, she told me to be quiet, which is her right as my sister. The case moved forward. I want to be honest with you about this part because I think people sometimes expect legal proceedings to feel like the ending of a movie, clean and swift, and they are not. They are slow, and they are technical, and they involve a great deal of paperwork and waiting and conversations in fluorescent lit rooms. But the camera footage was clear. The audio was clear. There was no version of events that explained away what had happened, and my son and his wife eventually understood this. He was charged with felony assault, and a set of other charges related to the premeditation the prosecution argued was evident in their actions over the preceding weeks. His wife faced her own charges. I testified once, in a deposition, sitting at a conference table with my cane leaning against the chair beside me and my attorney next to me, and I said what had happened in the same clear voice I had used to explain long division to 9-year-olds for 3 decades. The defense attorney was not as prepared for me as he should have been. I am not going to tell you that I felt nothing when I sat across from the legal process that would determine my son's fate. I am not going to tell you I felt righteous. What I felt was something more complicated and more honest than that, a grief that had already happened somewhere in that basement when I lay on the concrete and listened. A grief that had already made itself known and settled and was now simply part of the record of my life, alongside the pot roast and the baseball games and the decades of lunches I had packed with care. What I felt, above all, was clear. The farmland is still mine, all 40 acres of it. In the spring, when the fields were coming back and the air smelled like the particular wet earth smell of this county in April, I walked to the far fence line for the first time since the fall, slowly, with my cane, pausing when I needed to, and I stood there for a while looking at the land my husband and I had bought when we were young and did not yet know what we were building toward. It is beautiful land, rolling and quiet, and the kind of green in spring that you can't quite describe to anyone who hasn't stood in it. My sister has been living with me full time now. This was always the plan. But it became the plan more firmly after everything, and she has turned the spare bedroom into something she calls her art room that I am not allowed to criticize because she is my sister and she is allowed to have her hobbies. She has taken up painting. The paintings are, to be generous, expressive. I have told her they are wonderful. She knows I am lying but accepts this as the kindness it is intended to be. I updated my estate documents. My attorney had gone through everything with me in careful detail, and there were things I wanted to change and things I wanted to make permanent, and one specific addition I had decided on in the hospital room while I watched my sister sleep in the recliner. The scholarship fund at the elementary school is now significantly larger. There are children in this county who will go to college who might not otherwise, and that is something I think my husband would have liked very much. He was a quiet man who believed in the long game, in building things that outlast you. I believe in that too. There are people who ask me, when they hear this story, how I am not more angry. They expect anger. I can see it in the way they frame the question, the anticipation of it. They want me to be burning, and I understand that. I understand why the anger is what people reach for first when they imagine themselves in my position. But here is what I know after 68 years of being a person in the world. Anger is a fire you have to tend. It takes fuel, and it takes attention, and it can warm you, but it can also burn down everything you've built if you're not careful. I had a choice, after everything, about what I was going to tend. I chose the farmland, and my sister and the children at the elementary school who will one day open a letter that changes the direction of their lives without ever knowing my name. I chose my coffee in the morning and the kitchen window and the way this county looks in April. I chose the long game. My hip is better than the doctors expected. Not what it was, it will never quite be what it was, but better. I walk without the cane on good days now, around the house, on level ground. I am careful on stairs. I hold the rail. My sister has added extra lighting in every stairwell in the house, which I pretended to find excessive, and which I am privately grateful for every single day. The farmland, last fall, was leased to a young couple from one county over who want to grow lavender and winter wheat. They are serious and careful, and they ask good questions when we talk about the land. And the way they look at the fields reminds me of how my husband used to look at them like something precious, like something worth taking care of. I like them very much. I sit on the back porch some evenings, and I can see their work happening at the far edge of the property, small figures moving in the long light. And it is one of the better things I have to look at in this life. I want to say one more thing before I'm done, and I want to say it directly to anyone who might be listening who is older, who has something worth protecting, who has maybe started to feel that the people around them are looking at them differently than they used to, with more interest, with more calculation, with the particular attention that a certain kind of person pays to a thing they want. Listen to that feeling. Do not apologize for it. Do not talk yourself out of it. Do not decide you are being uncharitable. Trust what you have earned. The right to trust after decades of being a person who pays attention, go to your attorney. Update your documents. Put your protections in writing and in triplicate and in the hands of someone you know, not someone you hope, not someone you want to believe in, but someone you actually know. Call your sister. Tell her where the camera is. The hard candy bowl is still on my kitchen table. Old habits, as I said. My coffee is cold again, but the morning light is doing something particularly good to the fields today, and my sister is calling from the hallway asking if I want eggs, and the lavender at the far fence line is coming in thicker than last year, and I am here. I am still here, and that, it turns out, is the whole point.